Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. This Honorable Superior Court for the County of Wake is now convened and sitting for this special ceremonial session. The Honorable Judge Brian Collins, present and presiding. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. God save this state and this honorable court.
Welcome to this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court. I'm Brian Collins, resident Superior Court Judge for Wake County. The Wake County Bar has a long tradition of gathering together in special ceremonial session to honor and celebrate the lives of our colleagues who have passed recently. Thank you for allowing us to do that. It means a lot to us, and we enjoy learning about your loved one and understanding their contributions to our legal system and to our community. And with that, I'll pass it on to our Master of Ceremonies.
My name's Russell Babb. I'm the president of the 10th Judicial District Bar. On behalf of the more than 6,000 members of the 10th, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. It's always difficult when we lose a colleague or a loved one, and it's our hope that this video will celebrate our colleagues' lives and remember them fondly.
Your Honor, Mr. President, members of the bar, friends, and family, a warm and heartfelt greetings to you all. My name is Brian Owen, and along with Deontay Thomas, I serve as the co-chair to the Memorials Committee for the 10th Judicial District Bar. On behalf of the members of the committee, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us for what will be a very special session of Superior Court. The Wake County Bar is a special place. I hear people say this often, and I'm happy to say that I've observed it myself. There's a sense of community here in Wake County, an undercurrent of respect and collegiality. And we've seen this play out over the past 18 months, where lawyers faced with new restrictions, stresses, and responsibilities in their personal and professional lives due to this pandemic have responded to each other not with anger and not with disregard for the person, but instead with kindness, flexibility, and grace. We've all had to adapt to this new world, and these special memorial sessions are no exception. These special sessions are one of the primary contributors to our community of lawyers. They are integral to the fabric of our bar. And although this session may look different than those past, it is critical that we continue in our efforts to stop and to remember the individuals that made a difference in this community and in our personal lives. I always walk away from these sessions feeling encouraged and inspired about our profession and our community. And I hope that is your experience today. To that end, I want to express our sincere thanks to the families of our honorees for allowing us as a local bar to recognize their loved ones in this manner. For those who have previously attended these special sessions, my words will sound familiar, but I do believe they bear repeating. Today, although we are not physically together, we are collectively joined in spirit for this unique and important opportunity. An opportunity to gather, not to mourn, but to remember some incredible members of our legal community, to honor their contributions to our profession, perhaps even to share a laugh with a funny memory or learn something new about someone that we've known for some time. And most importantly, to reflect upon and be inspired by the tremendous impact that these individuals had not only on our professional lives, but our personal lives as well.
I'm pleased and honored to remember my law partner at Hatch, Little and Bunn, but more importantly, my very good friend, Harold Walton Berry Jr., who passed away on September 27th, 2019, while on vacation in France with his wife of 50 years, Anita Berry, and close family and friends. In addition to Anita, Harold is survived by his son, Howell Berry, and his daughter, Mebane Pruitt, and 6 grandchildren, Charlotte, Catherine, and Helen Berry, and Trey, Mason, and Caroline Pruitt. Over the last 16 years of Harold's life, he enjoyed time with his grandchildren, who referred to him as Pops, whether it be walking on a golf course, going fishing, or taking them to hunt at North State Hunt Club, where Harold was a longtime member, or just at home making his famous chocolate milkshake. Harold was born December 21st, 1945, and grew up in Cedartown, Georgia. And this may sound like one of Harold's old stories, but believe it or not, he played end on the football team, which was a perennial power in North Georgia. From there, Harold went to UNC Chapel Hill, where he obtained 3 things of importance: his Bachelor of Arts in English, his JD in Law, and Anita Berry, whom he met on a blind date in 1967 and never looked back. From there, Harold joined Hatchell & Bunn, where he practiced for 46 years and served as our managing partner for 26 of those years. When Harold resigned that position, I had the privilege of serving as managing partner for 5 years. And about a year and a half into my tenure, I realized what a great service Harold had given to the firm and what a burden he had carried by being the managing partner for that long. No lawyer should have to take that burden, but Harold carried it and did so very well. Harold was considered by the firm as a great guy. The firm was his second family. He would spend so much time building friendships with people over 5 decades. Harold was an expert, I would say, and had a great deal of knowledge on the law and the administrative regulations related to the petroleum industry. Harold served as general counsel to the North Carolina Petroleum and Convenient Marketers and also the Carolina Asphalt Paving Association. And Harold represented many of those individual members as their lawyer. Harold was affable. He was a great friend, a great mentor. He had a great, and I would say sometimes quirky sense of humor. Harold served, though, on a number of boards in Wake County: the Salvation Army, the Boys and Girls Club of Raleigh, and the Raleigh Kiwanis Club, where he served as president. Harold was known for his kindness, affability, sense of humor, which I say was somewhat quirky at times. Harold and I were returning from an arbitration in eastern North Carolina related to the petroleum industry, and we were driving back on Highway 64, and I noticed cell towers along the way. And Harold said, you know, when I was in college, they didn't have cell towers, but they had these big radio towers. And he said, when I was in college one summer, I had a job going around southeastern part of the United States, climbing those radio towers and putting light bulbs in, changing the light bulbs. And he told me all about, staying in these dumpy hotels along the way and back in the woods and rattlesnakes and so on and so forth. And we got back to the office and pulled in the parking lot, and I was getting out of his car. I said, Harold, that was a great story about the radio towers and the light bulbs, but I don't believe a word of it. And he said, you don't believe me? And I said, no, that's a great story, but I don't believe it. I was kind of teasing with him. The next morning, he comes bebopping into my office. He's got this big, wide grin on his face, and he says, I spent 2 hours last night going through my attic to find this picture. And he hands me a Polaroid picture of himself strapped in a harness, leaning back. He's got his hand up, changing light bulb in a radio tower. Without skipping a beat, I looked at him and said, Harold, with the technology today, anybody could Photoshop your picture into that Polaroid. And he got this puppy dog look on his face, his hurt feelings, and he went out of my office kind of mumbling to himself, my law partner doesn't trust me. Well, after Harold died, after his memorial service, one of his fraternity brothers called me up and said, he just wanted to share some of his thoughts on Harold. I didn't know the guy. And he said that they had a lot of guys in the fraternity that didn't have much contact with the fraternity. They had not been in touch. This guy had an email list of all the fraternity brothers. He'd say, I'll send out emails on things, and nobody would respond. He said, but when I sent out the email on Harold, everybody responded, even the guys that hadn't been in touch for 30 years, talking about what a great guy Harold was, what a great friend he'd been at the fraternity. He said, I want you to know that's a great testament to Harold that all those people responded. I thought the conversation was over, and he went on to tell me, he said, I'll never forget the summer that Harold went around the southeastern United States changing light bulbs on radio towers. We finished the call, and I looked up at the ceiling and said, Harold, you got the last laugh, and deservedly so. So thank you for letting me share Harold Berry with you.
Good afternoon. My name is Terry Sullivan. It's my privilege to be here today to honor the memory of a former member of this assemblage, George Franklin Givens. I was asked to speak here by Mary Barnack, George's widow. I came to know George through 23 of his 25 years of work within a division of the Legislative Services Office of the General Assembly, during which I was the division's director. George Givens was born in Roanoke, Virginia in 1946 and was raised by his grandparents. He was a proud graduate of Andrew Lewis High School in Salem, Virginia. He began his college education at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. In 1970, George received a BA in history from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and he moved to North Carolina to teach in the schools of Northampton and later Hertford counties. While teaching at the Gaston High School in Northampton County, George met Mary Barnack, a fellow teacher. They married in 1974. George later became the principal of a middle school in Hertford County. While engaged in his educational duties, he studied for and received an MA Education Administration from East Carolina University in 1979. In 1980, George began a shift in his professional life by attending North Carolina Central's law school, from which he graduated in 1983. While at Central, he was a member of the Law Review. For the years 1984 and 1985, he was a staff attorney with Legal Services of the Coastal Plains, now Legal Aid of North Carolina, at its Ahoskie office. A fellow attorney from that period described George as a zealous advocate for his clients in some of the poorest counties in this state. In December 1985, George began work with the Legislative Services Office's Research, now Legislative Analysis Division, and worked there until 2010. He began as a legislative analyst, attorney 1, and rose over the years to senior legislative analyst, attorney 3, the highest staff designation in the division. During his years at the legislature, George Givens served as the principal staff person and supervisor of the environmental team of lawyers and researchers at the division. He was counsel to the various House and Senate standing committees, including the House Committee on Environmental and Natural Resources, the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Environmental Resources, and to various legislative study committees. Two of these study committees are especially noteworthy. The Environmental Review Commission functioned at that time as the principal oversight entity studying issues and proposing legislation related to environmental, natural resources, and environmental health. George also served in that capacity with the Legislative Commission on Global Climate Change. He created the 605 process, named for and held in the Appropriations Room, 605, of the Legislative Office Building. There, at the direction of legislators, George Givens convened ad hoc groups of stakeholders to address and work through policy issues. The aim of the process was to produce consensus legislation that most, if not all, of the issue's stakeholders would support through the legislative process. George was instrumental in crafting the Renewable Energy Portfolio, Solar Energy and Wind Farms Act, the Clean Smokestacks, Coal-Firing Power Plant Act, and in dealing with the issue of interbasin transfer of water. He filed with the Secretary of State's office a map prepared by a professor at NC State of the North Carolina's river basins. That map later was designated by law as identifying the boundaries of those basins. George often worked into the midnight hours. His dry, wry sense of humor was beloved by many colleagues legislators, and lobbyists alike. Over the years, George was recognized for exceptional work in many areas and in many times. Among his honors are the Order of the Longleaf Pine in 2007, co-hosting with the Emerging Issues Forum at NC State, the International Panel for Clean Climate in 2008. George Givens was one of 2 legislative staff members from southeastern states whom the United Kingdom's consulate in Atlanta invited to join state legislators in visiting their country. The aim was to have the attendees see firsthand how the British government, business, and people were addressing climate change challenges there. The North Carolina Wildlife Federation's Achievement Award, Conservation of the Year, was given to George in 2009. In his later years at the General Assembly and thereafter, George struggled with the effects of Parkinsonism. He retired from the Research Division in 2010. During his earned retirement, he and wife Mary traveled extensively in Europe. George died in November 2018. In addition to his noteworthy legal career, George Givens left his beloved wife, Mary, now living and tending her mother in Goldsboro, and 3 children, sons Gregory, born in 1985, an Afghan war veteran, and Andrew, born in 1989, a designer of kitchen and bathroom cabinetry, and daughter Meredith, born in 1987, a traveling nurse. George's bloodline extends to his granddaughter, Emma Givens, born in 2014, of his son Gregory. George Givens was a proud member of this association. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Wallace Finlator. I was a friend of Counselor Thomas Sims Erwin. All of us have friendships that flourished in high school but not thereafter, or in college but not before college or after college. And probably all of us have friendships that we made in our child-rearing decades but faded after the children grew up. And perhaps we have friends who were our friends at the office or at the courthouse, but with whom we did not socialize outside the office or courthouse. I have friends that fit into those categories, but Thomas Sims Erwin was different. He was my friend in high school, during college, during the postgraduate years, and thereafter until his untimely death in 2019. Our wives and children developed friendships, and Tom's friends became my friends, and my friends became his. And throughout our lives, each of us expanded the widening circle of friendships of the other. Tom was my friend for all seasons and for all my life. Tom was a well-known member of the Wake County Bar for decades. He started his law career defending the environment at a time when fighting for the environment was still a new thing in the legal arena. One of Tom's first clients was environmental and civil rights activist Jim Wallace, who was a 2-time mayor of Chapel Hill and a professor at UNC. Among Tom's most significant accomplishments include securing land for the Cane Creek Reservoir in Orange County and successfully forcing safety concessions from Carolina Power and Light when it announced plans to build 4 reactors at the Sharon Harris nuclear plant, and only one eventually was built. The League of Conservation Voters named Tom an NC environmental champion. But law was just one of Tom's range of interests, which were encyclopedic. For example, he fell in love with bell ringing and he enjoyed helping ringing the bells at Christ's Episcopal Church in downtown Raleigh, whose services he attended regularly. For example, he loved the German language, and he loved to say German words to my wife Zilke, who is a native German speaker. For example, again, he became an Anglophile and loved to travel to England. And one time, in fact, I met him in London, and Tom showed me around London and took me to places I would have never found by myself, such as the boat race in Henley up the Thames River. For yet another example of Tom's wide-ranging interests, he was a scrupulous student of architecture and American history, and especially the history of the American Southland. One did not have to know Tom very long before getting a rant from him about how ugly Raleigh had become from architectural modernizing, as opposed to Savannah, Georgia, where he purchased an apartment in an ancient home near lots of Spanish moss. Politics was a lifelong interest for Tom. In fact, he broke off his study of law at Chapel Hill in 1968 to help manage the presidential campaign for Eugene McCarthy. He was a lifelong Democrat and progressive activist. In city politics, Tom tirelessly advocated for candidates whom he considered progressive or neighborhood friendly. He successfully managed the campaigns of his friend John Gilbert for chairman of the Wake County School Board, because he was certain that John Gilbert would help steer Wake County towards racial fairness and balance. Tom and I had countless discussions about politics, and we often disagreed. But his opinions were always rational, and his public policy choices always tended towards whatever was kind and gentle, and whatever was best for the underdog. Tom did some things in his life that were almost unique. For example, he moved a whole 2-story brick home threatened by developers from its original site on St. Mary's Street in Raleigh, westward down Hillsborough Street, lifting up the telephone wires as the house went along about a foot a minute on scraping wheels to a location on College Place in Cameron Park. I've never seen anything like that in my life, before or after. Throughout his life, Tom was an intellectual. When he moved to Raleigh from Iowa in the 11th grade, he immediately astounded his classmates, me included, by asking his teachers questions that showed he was actually interested in the subject matter. I remember first noticing him in English class when he asked the teacher probing questions about T.S. Eliot. The rest of us guys were mostly just interested in sports and what's for lunch. Despite his intellectuality, or perhaps in part because of it, Tom was popular in high school. When he made claims such as, "I may have been born in Iowa, but I was conceived in Georgia," we, his classmates, were delighted by his courage to be himself. Tom was never a snob or a social climber. He was democratic and liked or didn't like you based on who you were and not on how important you are. Because of his encyclopedic interests, Tom could talk to you about just about anything except maybe higher math, fly fishing, or golf. Last but far from least, Tom was a strong family man. He loved his 3 children, and he was intensely interested in what they were doing and proud of their accomplishments. I know that because he talked to me about his children all the time. When Tom passed away untimely in the summer of 2019, hundreds of well-wishers came to his funeral at Christ's Episcopal Church to pay their respects to this remarkable man. And by this testimonial, I pay further and additional respects before the Wake County Bar to Counselor Tom Sims Erwin. Ave atque vale. Tom.
I was very honored when Sally called me to see if I would do this reading for Nick. He was a very good friend of mine, and we shared office space for a long time. Nick was born in 1933 in Lexington, North Carolina, and attended the University of North Carolina, where he later told his wife that I didn't know there were any other schools to go to. He finished his undergrad there and then joined the Air Force as an air traffic controller, and then returned to Chapel Hill, obviously, to attend law school. He supplemented his tuition somewhat by forming a musical group called the Nick Kearns Satellites, and they played in all the nightclubs and the bars and things in downtown Chapel Hill, which leads to where he was just a great one-man show. Also, he had a love of music, and when we were sharing office space together, we were always somewhat surprised at times, but always happy when the random one-man concert would pop up and reverberate throughout the whole building. After the Air Force, and his law school, he joined the FBI and was initially stationed out around Wisconsin. And one story that I remember going over with him one time was after the super secret source for the Woodward Bernstein Washington Post folks was codenamed Deep Throat. And when Deep Throat was eventually revealed to be Mark Felt, who at the time was the deputy director of the FBI, I jokingly asked Nick, I said, when you were with the FBI, did you ever know an agent named Mark Felt? And he said, know him. He was my regional director in charge. I said, so you saw him a lot? He said, yes. And I said, well, then when you talked to him, did you just call him Deep, or could you call him Mr. Throat? And he said, I called him Sir. He had that kind of sense of humor. After 2 years with the FBI, he became a federal prosecutor. And one of the highlights for him, anyway, I guess, was he investigated the McDonald case, along with other folks in the office. After being a federal prosecutor, he was a lawyer for an insurance company, did some private practice, and then became the first full-time county attorney in Wake County. And that was probably his most important job because that's where he met Sally. When he finished that, he opened his private practice when I met him, and he was in private practice for the rest of his career. He was also a grocery bagger at the A&P and the Harris Teeter. And I asked Sally one time why he did that. She said he just likes talking to the people at the stores. And he did that for part-time, off and on. And being right next door to him, we all talked about cases all the time. He would go over some of his, I go over mine. And I noticed that he was extremely meticulous in keeping his notes, made a note of everything, and worked very hard to give his clients the best representation that he could give them. The concerts that he put on, impromptu, just him. He had an electric piano that he bought from one of the big box stores, and I helped him load it down there, put it in there, and any day we could hear him singing, mostly old kind of the boogie-woogie kind of songs and things like that. And that piano, Sally tells me, is still in the living room with the same piece of music that was on there the last time he played it. Nick was a character. He was a good lawyer, represented his clients well. He made our office more interesting, and we're all going to miss him.
My brother and I, Steve, practiced law for several decades here in Greensboro. We were known as Agapion and Agapion attorneys. We practiced general practitioners. We did normal practice. We had a lot of Greek clients. The one thing, Steve did not like to represent the Greek clients. They all passed them off to me. He said, I said, why is that, Steve? He said, because you give them good advice and then they won't take it. No, we never disagreed about anything. Over all these years, we got along well. And Steve and I really got along real well. That's about the biggest thing that I can say. Okay. He was a good lawyer. He did his job. He was very functional, very professional in everything he did. He wanted everything to be right. And I really missed him. I never had any other partners in law. He was my only partner, and I couldn't ask for a better partner. Couldn't ask for any better partner. A lot of different cases that we went on. Like I say, we never had a falling out. I really missed him.
I'm deeply honored to get today to talk about my friend Bob Farmer and to help to memorialize him. What a great man he was. A dear friend to me. He was born down in Johnston County on a farm. He talked a lot about his pet pig. He had a pet pig named Jim. That was the perfect name for a pig. And he grew up and right in the middle of the Depression. He was born in 1933. I would say at the beginning of these few remarks that I think it's fair to say he was a great man. He was a remarkable man, a very generous and kind man. He graduated from the public schools down in Johnston County, and then he went over to Chapel Hill. And there he met the prettiest girl on campus. Her name was Martha. And he says that everybody was stunned that she would be willing to go out with him, but she did. And they became a couple for life. They had 3 children, Joseph, James, and Caroline, and they had 8 grandchildren. And this was a really happy family. And it was my great honor to have Bob as my seatmate in the General Assembly. We sat right up close to the front. And if you want to know a person's heart, sit next to him or her at the General Assembly. We sat together through hundreds of debates about every kind of problem or issue that you can imagine. And because of that, because we voted on those issues, I knew Bob Farmer's heart. I knew his heart absolutely, and I knew he was a kind man and good-hearted. He became one of the leaders of the General Assembly. And he and I worked together along with 4 other people who represented our county. We worked together on one of the most important issues our county has confronted, and that is whether to merge the Raleigh Public School and the Wake County Public School, whether to merge those 2 schools to make it one merged group of schools, public schools. It would be cheaper to run, and there wasn't a requirement of 2 separate groups of people operating 2 separate schools. But this was a real tough issue because the people of Wake County didn't want it. And the reason it was important was that people were moving out of Wake County or moving away to the county schools. So their kids would not be in the Raleigh public schools. And so what was happening there was that there was a new segregation occurring, and you could see that the Raleigh public schools were becoming much, much more populated by African American people, and it was getting out of hand. And this was not going to do, it just wouldn't do. But the people voted it down. The African American community was very worried about it and wanted it to happen. They wanted the schools to be merged. And a lot of really great African American people worked with us. But at any rate, even though there was an election and the public voted down the idea of the merger of the schools, we merged them anyway. And it took a lot of courage, if I may say so. And Bob was the leader. Bob led the effort. And people would say, what part of no don't you understand? We have said no, but we did it anyway with Bob's leadership. And I wanted you to know that Bob did that, and it took a lot of courage for him to do it. So we merged the schools, and we thought we wouldn't be reelected. Nobody would be reelected. But we campaigned for reelection, and Bob and I campaigned together, and these were some of my happiest memories. He was a wonderful campaigner. And we campaigned all over Wake County. Every town in Wake County, Knightdale, all the counties. I mean, all the towns in the counties. And we would go into a little store, and we would buy some crackers. And then we would buy a drink. And after we had spent, at that time, a quarter or whatever, we would raise the idea of whether we could put our pictures and our posters in the window. Most people said, yes, you can do that. Some said no, and if people said no, you can't do that, they were interested in our whether we were Democrats or Republicans. And when we told them what we were, if they disagreed with that, they would say, no, you can't put your posters in the window. And one time, a man threw our change at us, and it rolled around on the floor because he didn't like the particular party we represented. Bob was a great campaigner and a great legislator. Bob was a very highly honored man. His walls were covered with plaques and indications of the appreciation people had for him. And he was honored by the Wake County Bar many times, and he won the Joseph Branch Professionalism Award, and he won other awards. He was chosen to be a Superior Court judge, and for 10 years he was a wonderful Superior Court judge. I had many cases, and he many times decided against me, which upset me very, very much. And I had to pout for a little while, but then I would get over it and it'd be okay, because I knew he made the right decision. He was right. After his service as a judge, he was chosen to be the chair of the new Ethics Commission, and he served on that with great dignity. Bob was appreciated by everyone who knew him. He loved his family. He loved his county, his state, and he loved our country. And he was a great American. I think I could say he was one in a million. He was a rare human being. He was a great father and a great husband, and he loved his family. And I will forever remember Bob Farmer. Thanks a lot.
That concludes our program. Thank you to all of our presenters for their thoughtful words and shared memories. I want to thank all of the members of the Memorial Committee, as well as our videographer, Brian Miller of Frontrunner Productions. And a very special and significant thank you goes to the staff of the Wake County Bar and 10th Judicial District. Without their incredible efforts, this excellent presentation would not have been possible. Thank you to Judge Brian Collins for presiding over this session. And lastly, I extend a most sincere thanks to you all for joining us for this special session.
All right, that ends our celebration. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the 10th Judicial District Bar, especially the Memorials Committee of the 10th Judicial District Bar for putting this together. Thank you to all the participants, to the folks who gave the tributes. Thank you for letting us honor your loved ones. It's a very important thing that we do. And with that, this ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court stands adjourned, sine die.